We are talking Cobweb, directed by Samuel Bodin and stars Lizzy Caplan and Antony Starr, who you may know from The Boys. And this is kind of like a medium budget horror movie that I would say is kind of like a cross between Malignant and the Barbarian movie, with a little bit of J-horror perhaps in there as well. Now, without any spoilers, it focuses on this young boy who seems to come from a somewhat strange family. His father, played by Antony Starr, his mother, played by Lizzy Caplan, seem to be somewhat kind of overprotective and somewhat a little off kilter, you might say. His kind of teacher is a little concerned because he's very withdrawn. He's getting bullied by the this kind of typical kind of school bully in his kind of family. And what makes matters worse is that this young kid starts to hear scratching and knocking from behind the walls, and eventually that turned into a voice of a female of some description. And you know, they kind of strike up somewhat of a friendship, you might say. And it's like, who do you trust in this movie ultimately? Without kind of giving anything away, you know, the parents are a little sketchy. This voice kind of seems a little sketchy. They're kind of somewhat of at odds, you might say. So who do you trust? Who do you kind of go with? And who's got dark secrets, you might say? What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So this is a quite a striking film visually, I would say, in some ways. I think the cinematography here is certainly kind of somewhat stylized, and the direction here is pretty strong. And you know, you'll be reminded of a little bit, like, as I say, the kind of like the visual flair of something along the lines of, you know, like kind of Malignant to some degree. And the story has some similarities in a way as well, but it certainly has a kind of a hyper kind of real kind of feel to it. So, for example, if you look at the kind of the interiors of this house, I mean, it doesn't look like a real house. It looks like a kind of like a set, if we're being picky, but it's kind of like, it looks like an over-stylized house, if that makes sense. So we have this kind of like huge rooms, and they look a little creepy. So you have this little boy in this kind of like large room with kind of quite kind of like bold wallpaper and things like this. So it's a deliberate choice here to make it seem like sort of oppressive to a certain degree. The way the lighting hits the walls and things like this. It's a kind of creepy, dimly lit house. A very kind of like stylized environment. And when he kind of goes to school, it's kind of the photography is a lot more natural looking, for example. So when he's out of the house, it's all filmed pretty kind of like normal. So it has that sort of stark contrast to when we have the sequences at home, where you can, you know, the movie is, even without having any kind of, you know, actual on-screen events on screen, the context of the way the movie is filmed, you know that there's something amiss in this house. So I really enjoyed the kind of like the direction, the kind of like the production design, the kind of the cinematography here. I thought it really adds another kind of layer to this movie. Secondly, I would say, obviously, you've got some good actors in this movie. Lizzy Caplan and Antony Starr, especially Antony Starr these days, his star is on the rise, being in The Boys, and he kind of plays, you know, he's got that kind of Homelander-esque kind of like kind of cruelness kind of under the surface, if that makes sense, where he's on the surface of it, he seems to maybe an outsider, seems like quite an attentive father, but you know, it's that still waters kind of like run deep kind of thing kind of going on behind his eyes and everything. And same with kind of Lizzy Caplan. So you think that they, you know, for the surface level, you think, you know, that they seem, you know, a little bit weird, but they seem okay enough. But can tell there's kind of like these machinations kind of going on. So I really dug the acting, and especially from this little boy as well. This child actor, I thought did a great job. I mean, child actors are kind of, you know, they're hit and miss, let's just say, but I think they've struck gold in this particular kind of one, in making this kind of like a very kind of like likeable, relatable, but you kind of feel like certainly empathy for him. So you've got good acting, we've got kind of like reasonable kind of like sort of set design and everything like that. The character kind of development is interesting because you kind of like, you don't quite know what you're watching, but it's not, you know, I've critiqued movies like this before where you don't really know what's going on. I think it gives you enough to kind of, so you can kind of like, you're not completely lost, you're kind of going with the film, but you don't quite know what the deal is with the parents, you don't quite know who's on the up and up. Is this voice kind of in the wall, is that kind of from an altruistic source, or is it, you know, are we going to be revealed that the parents are kind of like the, you know, they might be a little weird, but are they on the up and up and things like that. So it kind of like, you don't quite know what's going on, but the movie doesn't kind of lose you in kind of like a, you know, a spiraling narrative that you just don't follow. You kind of like, you're waiting for things to kind of be revealed. So, you know, you kind of go into that. And then in the second half of the movie, it gets a lot more kind of overt and kind of the way what we see on screen in regards to kind of horror. There's certainly a kind of a reasonable amount of kind of violence inflicted on people towards the kind of like the end of the movie in kind of like gory and sort of unnatural kind of fashion. I have mixed feelings about the kind of like the more overt horror elements of it, but in some respects, again, if you like movies like Malignant and A Barbarian, it's going to be in your wheelhouse, I would say. It's not exactly the same in regards to kind of like those films, but you know, it's in that kind of wheelhouse. And if you enjoyed those two movies, I suspect you might like the kind of this one as well. It's interesting. I have mixed feelings. I think visually speaking, you know, it kind of looks very kind of striking at times, but we'll come on to maybe what doesn't work. And you know, I was kind of engaged in the story. I kind of thought the characters are interesting. I kind of, you know, you start really liking his teacher, for example, who seems to be very kind of like a, you know, good person looking out for him, etc. So let's transition to maybe what I didn't think worked quite as well. So the actual horror elements of it, the kind of the more overt stuff, without spoiling anything for you, I don't know if it completely worked on a number of levels, to be honest. I think certainly on a kind of like a mythology level, the story that it tells us, I don't know if it really made 100% sense. It's one of these things where if you think about some of the kind of the story elements within this film, either some things go just unanswered and you just don't know, you know, what that plot thread was introduced for, or you're thinking there would have been a better way. People involved in certain kind of decisions in the movie, there would have been an easier way, a better way that they kind of would have maybe approached things, shall we say. Then we've got to look at things like the physics of what kind of we see. Is there a supernatural element or isn't there? Because on one hand it would say there isn't, but on the other hand you see evidence that maybe there is. So, you know, the plot wise you can follow. I mean, like I say, it keeps you in the dark deliberately for so long, but then it's kind of revealed. That's the kind of the bones of the plot are there for you to follow. But there are some elements here that I don't think made huge amounts of sense. And then visually speaking, again, there's certain aspects that I thought looked creepy and unnatural, but it looks a little bit, it kind of looks a bit silly in a way as well at the same time. So there's kind of mixed feelings there. I didn't particularly like the very last kind of sequence in the movie, which is kind of like a montage, is the best way I'd describe it. I didn't really think it needed it and added anything to it, and I actually think it confused the story a little bit. So I would kind of just ignore that, personally speaking. And this is one of those films where I feel like they had, I don't know, you kind of needed a little bit more context in regards to the setup, the relationship to these kind of parents. I mean, the idea being is that you feel like they're off kilter, but you don't quite know why. But to me, you know, I didn't really feel like I felt like I was missing some things. And certainly I would have liked to have seen the aftermath of what actually transpires in the movie. Or I often do with these some films sometimes like this. We're thinking, you know, I would love to see how they're kind of, how things are kind of like explained to people and stuff like that. So, you know, it's certainly an entertaining film. And I think it's well done in some aspects. Certainly a very kind of like well shot movie and kind of visually kind of striking. And I for the most part, I think the story kind of worked. You know, not completely. There are certainly things here that I think, nah, you could pick holes in that. But strong performances. You know, this one to me. Do you know, I'm going to give it I'll give it a 7 out of 10 because I do think, you know, the art design there, the acting is there. There's some creepy kind of factors. It didn't quite hit all the marks for me, but again, I'll give it a solid 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.